Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. Welcome back. Today, I've got Rens Hayes on the show. He is the co-founder of H&O Structural Engineering. And I met Rens back in 2018 at Ken Sanginario's Value Growth Advisor Training. That's that VOP that I keep talking about. I've had Ken on the show quite a few times in the past. And it's been really fun watching Rens execute on the things I talk about every day. What's been more interesting is about how Rens got into this mindset. He learned firsthand what buyers actually look for when he went through the sale process, or I should say the potential sale process of his father's business. And that experience completely changed how he thought about building and scaling a company. Because most business owners, as we constantly are talking about, don't think about what actually drives value of their company until they have to, whether it's due diligence, a potential sale, or trying to get back out of the day-to-day. And that's when, unfortunately, the triggering event happens. And when you realize that growth for growth's sake means nothing if it doesn't increase the cash flow and equity value of your company. So instead of just growing revenue and hoping for the best with H&O, Rens decided to take this mindset and apply it to his own company, H&O Structural Engineering. So he decided to get out of his father's business and get into his own and use these philosophies and skill sets and frameworks to scale his own company into an 8-figure business, making sure that everything that him and Jeremiah are doing are enhancing the equity value and the future cash flow of the company. So Rens is going to talk about how he actually implements this mindset and the results and the things that he's experienced from this mindset. If you wanted to check out the video, it's on Spotify as well as YouTube. My editing team has been enhancing the video experience. So go check that out if you want. And then please share the episode and give it a rating on the podcast player that you're listening to. And I will be very grateful. So without further ado, here's my episode with Rens. I'm excited to catch up, man, because I've gone through a lot. Arcona was started and then I got out of it since we actually met, because I actually met Pat Hobby in the same training program.
Exactly
Ken's
right.
Ken's been on the podcast 3 times since episode 400. I literally just had him on literally twice, Rens, in the last 2 weeks, because I just can't get enough diving into the true jargon of valuations and free cash flow and all the shit that you and I started learning about in his core or in his training. So yeah, man, I'm excited to catch up.
Likewise. I mean, it was such a cool opportunity. And the program Ryan's referring to is the
The VO
Certified Value
the
Growth
CVGA. Is
Advisor,
that what it's called? Right?
CVGA. Yep. Ken Sanginario. And I sat next to you and Pat.
Yeah. It
And
was
couldn't have met 2 better guys.
and for you, I'm like, I haven't been through 5 days of 12-hour classes ever. And with my energy, and I'm just like, hey Rens, hey Rens, hey Rens, you're stuck next to me and you have to listen to me because I can't pay attention.
Yep. I know better than
uh,
this guy. Yeah.
so let's start. What's that?
I know better than this guy. Don't listen
Yeah.
to him.
Oh no, or just who knows what I don't. I mean, I don't think. I mean, the amount of eye-opening things that Ken taught me, I definitely didn't know more than him. I will say that, but it was what I find fascinating, and maybe this is a good lift-off point. You and I were the only owner operators in that room.
Exactly right.
Everybody else were advisors, which I have found an interesting dynamic over the years. And so why were you there? You and your dad were there. How did you what was the mindset? Because Rens, I've watched you have totally understood this time, cash flow, wealth. I want to design my life. And engineer type mindset, and even what you're doing with your time and your recruiting processes even 7 years ago with the remote. Anyways, we got a lot to catch up on, but why were
All
you
good
sitting in that
questions.
class?
So my business journey, I'm a structural engineer by trade. That's my business that I run with my partner, Jeremiah, today, H&O Structural Engineering. We're building a national company. And so, Ryan, we really met in the beginning stages of launching that company. And I was also towards the end of a period where I helped run my father's structural steel company. And we had one conversation that led to a potential buyer in a week, because I was like, I'm not going to take this company over. So we're not going to be a transition. We should start to learn about this. If there's a conversation out there, let's have
How
it.
did you know you were going to take it over though? Because it was a good business too, right? So you guys were both sitting there.
Very
I'm
good.
like, yeah. You had the opportunity, right?
I had the opportunity. It's a great business. Construction's a challenging business. It's high CapEx. It's challenging cash flow. It's generally a pretty tense environment. Like you can do my description of construction for everyone that's not exposed is you can do everything in your power to set up next week to be perfect. And at 5 a.m. on Monday, when you're driving to work, something else is going to screw up your whole week and you're going to have to react and pivot. And so it's hard to create freedom in that world. And so I just saw some of those challenges and learned more about equity and enterprise value. And I saw more opportunity in our vision for H&O that was more aligned with what I wanted in life. And my dad has a great business. He's still running it today, but we had that opportunity. And so I ended up getting thrown into due diligence like in a week or two. And I had been studying business. We had been running this business. We grew at 10x in 4 years. And I started answering questions about financials and organizing data. And it was nothing that we had ever like organized in that capacity and thought about it. And I'm like, damn, it makes way more sense to buy a business than to build one for 30 years. Jesus. And then
Insert Walker Dival, right?
I see what the investment banker's supposed to make. And I see the opportunity when you can buy cash flow. And I'm like, I need to learn way more about this business. And where I was as a business owner at the time, I'm kind of a self-taught. I was running the steel business with my father, full transparency, trying to align growth. And I was just studying business with books and audio and podcasts,
I
audiobooks,
remember you and I sitting in Ken's
just
training,
ripping
like
through all of
ripping
them. Yeah.
through audiobooks and like, I mean, it was like, oh, like it is. And I don't know if you had this experience too, Renz, but when I find someone that's like, oh yeah, I'm an audio or like, there's this like, oh, like the floodgates of like my complete, like unfiltered, like fire hose passion can get out.
We have a million things to talk about. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so
Oh,
in that process, I started networking in M&A and I met Ken. And then I started seeing like consulting and this sort of thing. And then like I was like, you mean I can just go take a crash course to learn what all these other guys know in like a week and like get to learn direct from you, Ken? Like I'm doing that. Like why wouldn't
yeah.
I build that
Yeah.
skill
Yeah.
if I want to grow my business? I don't want to pay somebody else to tell me how to grow my business. And
Yeah. Who
it
hasn't
was one
done
of the
all the
best
hard work?
investments I ever made.
Yeah.
One of the best investments I've ever made because at the time I felt like I had all this business acumen, but I felt like I was solving problems from the middle. I didn't know where to start.
Oh, that dude, you would be an engineer and word something like that. That it because the way I think about it, the concept and and I want to riff on this, Renz, is that because like with the ownership framework that I've worked on since, I mean, you and I had met, is like there's this red pill experience where it's like we're just dealing with shit of juggling cash flow, juggling inventory, juggling payroll, trying to have like it's like we hope that there will end up being cash in the checking account, but it's like a lot of this like complete chaotic mess. But like in the spirit of like going from order to from chaos to order, which I mean I've really geeked out on this, like the Fibonacci sequence, or like if you like look at like the allegory of the cave and all these different like like things in the past that allow us to think about this new mindset shift. I mean, that's what the Matrix is all about, the red pill. But like the way you said it is really insightful because it's like you're working on it from the middle. But it's like if you step back out and look at the big picture, it's like, well, how? Because the only thing that we have as the biggest constraint is time. Like, what the hell am I doing? Like, how does everything I do get me closer to my goals? And without looking at it like that, it's like it's paralyzing. So I'm fascinated how you worded it like that. So like how did that click into, like what are some of the concepts that helped you see it not just from the middle?
Seeing it differently now,
Yeah.
I would say one of the biggest ahas, like how that framework kind of organized the departments within a business. They call it the 8 functions of a business, right? It's strategic, it's planning, leadership, sales, marketing, people, operations, finance, and legal. I literally can recite it in the wheel that Ken drew it on the board over the disc matrix that tells you how to think. But most companies are strong in 2 or 3 of those areas and completely blind to the cost of their deficiencies in the other 5 or 6. And so the problem with the small business owner, and we talked about like you can get away as a small business intuitively, like understanding to solve problems, and you kind of have like this understanding of how it impacts you in a year. But you don't understand how these decisions are going to impact you in 5 as a small business owner until you step back and learn to look at business holistically. And So let's take the typical small business in engineering and construction. You have a skill set. You're an expert in this field. All right, I'm going to do this by myself because I can make more money than working for somebody else. Great. Now you get too much money. It's like the E-myth, right? Now I got to hire
Hmm.
somebody, but I didn't have a good recruiting and hiring process. I didn't have a training program. I didn't have a process for them to follow. I just expected them to figure it out like I figure it out.
Hmm. The plumber
And
hires more plumbers.
and there you go into your wheel. And the challenge with that small business owner is they might be good at operations, right? Because they're an expert at the trade. And they're always going to see the deficiency in their core expertise. They're always going to know that they can improve. But if they're a 95% in plumbing or mechanic work, and they're 5% in legal, 5% in marketing, no marketing, 10% in sales, becoming 96% efficient in plumbing or mechanic work is not going to improve the organizational value of the business. So
Well,
like
and
you
it's
had to
so true.
maintain balance to grow.
Well, and here's what, and this is why I kept having Ken back on the show because um, I'll give you a clip note of where I landed with all this stuff, Reds, and wanted to explain to you how it fits in, and I want to understand how you've been also applying these concepts as you've been scaling your business because you gave me, I mean, I still remember when we were sitting down, like what you were talking about, what you were working on, but to level set us with some like language here. So after like 10 years of this journey, Rens, I was like, okay, what did I learn? No, I want no services. I just want to work on the framework, the idea. And like when you and I were sitting in when I look at Ken's, I'm like, that's for the business, but like you and I are shareholders. We're a person, right? So that like it was almost it had to become more meta. It had to like go one. I had to zoom out one more than just the 8 functional areas of a company. It's like okay, all right, Rens, you're a dude, right? Like you have time. So you're gonna be here for 90. You know, I got that right up here. The life is good, and it's the my life in weeks. And like I gave myself to 100. So like every week I check off the box. My wife's like, God, you're so morbid. I'm like, that's it. Time is the constraint. And then every single day we work, we should be generating value that results in cash flow. So like when I boiled this all down, Reds, I'm like the three constraints is time that we should be generating cash flow from the value that we're creating. And then that we should be taking that cash flow and decoupling that from our time, so it starts off as a salary, but then we, start getting distributions, but we should be placing our bets back into the equity of our business to grow value. And so that's where Ken's 8 functions come in. So like hypothetically, you got $1 million and EBITDA. Let's say you got, well, not even necessarily EBITDA. Let's go to the cash flow statement. You say, okay, I got working capital, debt, taxes. So I go from $1 million down to like, hey, I've got $500,000 to reinvest. What am I going to do with it? Right. And then insert the 8 functional areas. But what has to happen first is like, how much does Rens want in free cash flow distributions? Without having that constraint and what you want with your timeline of your cash flow and equity, it like we're missing like the outside perimeter of the puzzle. So like I want to go in and say insert in like this ownership framework has to happen before the value growth, 8 functional areas, and then also before EOS. And so I say that because when I look at Ken's 8 functional areas and you being a structural engineer is so fascinating because I want to hear your thoughts. Is like it's the theory of constraints. It's the goal, right? So we're constantly looking at the bottlenecks of those 8 functional areas within the constraints of how much you are able to reinvest back into your company.
Correct. And then it's also, do you have a company that you can confidently deploy capital in, which I think
Right.
is the bigger hurdle. Like I ask myself this question
Great
a
question.
lot, and
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
I'm just getting to the scale of business where I do have a means to deploy. I'm kind of getting to that level now. But up until now, I like to think if somebody offered me $1 million to deploy into my business and they expected a 20% IRR over the next
Hmm.
3 years, how would I spend that money? And the
Hmm.
question, and I didn't have a great answer till now. Like I wouldn't take that capital because it's not that I don't know that I'll grow my business. It's not that it's that I don't know that I could grow faster with the million.
In
And
a way that's so this, oh, there's so much here. Cause like, but like, and what I've covered for the listeners in here, if they want to go back and check it out, the 2 episodes with Ken, and then I interviewed 2 investment bankers, Rens, where it's all about the internal rate of return of the discount. So you're discounting your future cash flows
yep,
after debt and taxes and working capital. So it's IRR to the shareholders is all based on that risk. But like what's so wild to me is like what's the probability of getting that future cash flow? And so many people, Rens, in the private equity space, in the M&A space, are literally making shit up because they need to deploy the capital, where
You're
you and
taking
I don't
risk.
need to.
Correct.
Like,
Yeah.
and then so that's what, like, well, you're being what I heard out of that comment is you're being real about how the world works, what the economic risks are, what your business risks are. Cause like you could take that money and like you could, generate more revenue, but like, are you really going to generate more sustainable cash flow? And you had probably had to do some learning and lessons learned in order to get more confident.
Yeah. And if you look at, let's say, the M&A world, institutional capital really gets interested at 5 million EBITDA.
Yeah. Right.
That's a pretty big business. So chances are, if you're below 5 million EBITDA, you have like risk asymmetry in overly deploying capital, unless you like have the framework is going to work at that scale. And so,
Which is so wild because like when you look at that US Census Bureau chart that I'm constantly referring to that Ken showed us, and it's like, okay, 5 million EBITDA is like 1% of all companies or
yeah,
less.
probably less than
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you're talking at least $100 million, which is 0.4% or whatever. So, like, it's so crazy when I've been watching these deals. Renz, you were talking about some of your industry and deploying capital and debt and equity. I'm going because, like, I've thought about raising a fund, Renz, over the last 7 years, and like
Yeah.
every single time, I'm just like, what the f would I do with the money? I wouldn't touch any of this shit.
Yeah, it
Like,
depends.
like realistically,
Unless you
based on the
get to a
risk.
certain scale, and then you have to have like the experience and the acumen to deliver. And then it's like, do I need to take this risk? That's the bigger question.
Tell me a little bit more about what you think about like so what does risk mean for you? Like when you say something like that, as you've been thinking about your life, your business, and the bets you're placing, how are you thinking about it?
I like to, a phrase I'll come back to is don't risk what you need for something that you don't, right? So like I would never put I have my financial goals and growth goals. And I would say a lot of that comes from like my biggest fear in life is not delivering on my capacity. It's not that I
Mm.
have this ever like growing thirst for growth and money, but that is kind of,
Define capacity and growth. So like in money, because like there's a lot of commingled terms there.
there's a lot of like, so when I talk about my personal capacity, I
Okay.
think it's like, hey, if somebody makes $10 million by every standard in the world, you'd be like, that's pretty amazing. But if you have the capacity of someone like a Jeff Bezos, that is significantly underperforming to what his potential is. So whatever my bar is, I am like internally driven to test what my limits are because I think I'm capable of much more than I have achieved to date. And not seeing that play out is doing a disservice to others. Like I hope to create opportunity. I hope to create career growth. I hope to inspire others, all of those things. I just think it's like in my DNA and what I have in the tank. So I want to play that out, and like not taking advantage of that is, I feel like, doing a disservice to myself and others.
Um, I'm resonating with you. And so I'll have to send you this video. So I just got done watching Huberman and Peterson for 4 hours recently. It was like last week they published it. And then it like snapped together a lot of ideas for me that I've been thinking about for a decade. So I published on YouTube, like understanding the meaning of life, God, and money. So like, just like a very small topic, right? But like what was fascinating to me, Renz, is because what I heard you just say is you're by looking at the highest potential goal that you have, then what we're doing is we're taking that goal and then everything is calibrating in our life and integrating towards that goal. So it's like this whole like that's what perception is, right? Like so like everything, you have the goal and everything has the path forward. And then what they were talking about, it was so awesome watching neuroscience and psychology at the highest level like intersect. And what they identified is that the higher the noble goal for that creates the biggest impact for the most amount of people over the most time frame, each unit of progress releases the highest amount of dopamine. And I was like, holy shit,
Each level releases the highest dose of dopamine.
dopamine. So, like, every step of clarity and pursuit of that potential, you're like, and effectively, just say it a different way, Rents. Like, I'm completely addicted to dopamine. Like, I love it so much, it's unbelievable. And like, it's just like I'm a dopamine addict. I mean, which is why I had to quit drinking and all these other bad habits that I had. And I had to come up with the goal because I'm like, I have to recalibrate my incentive system. Otherwise, I'm going to be a complete
Yeah, you got to
destructive
redefine
SOB.
what success is.
And that's why when I heard you say that's what's been like, it drags everything else up. And then you get addicted to that potential. And then if you're not in pursuit of that potential,
Hmm.
actually the word sin means missing the mark, according to that conversation. And it's an
Nice.
archery term. And I
I
was
like
like, anyway, so like when I think about like when you say, okay, well, your potential is it like, because I think a lot of people that listen in here, and myself included and some other people I work with, how do you think about that goal? Like, is it a net worth? Is it a cash flow? Is it a specific size of the company? Because what I think that I've struggled with and other people have too is being too rigid with the goal. You end up getting mad at yourself, and
Yeah.
being not clear enough doesn't fix what we just talked about. So how do you think about that?
Great conversation there, especially with the dissatisfaction. I think the nature of being driven and chasing something you've never achieved before is like signing up to be dissatisfied until you achieve that. And then how my mind works, I am not as rigid on goals and time frame, but I use goals in a 3 to 5 year window to build an execution plan and a go to
Mhm.
market strategy. And then once we're executing that, I like move to the next goal. So if I were to put that into context for what we're doing at H&O, we're building organically to about 20 million in revenue. We're a professional service business. And that to me is a sizable enough organization where I have that organizational balance that can continue to scale. And then from 20 million to say 100 million, it's longer organic growth in new geographic regions, but you have the business model that you can replicate,
Good
which
for you, man. I
means
just got to
there's a
pause
means.
because you were like, what, were you 3 or 4 million when we were sitting and hanging
Yeah,
out?
even less than that. Yeah.
But you built that infrastructure because
So
you
we're
always you
we're
always said like
building,
we need to replicate. Yeah,
we're on our way there, and but like we see the next few pieces that get us
that's
to that
awesome.
level. And then from there, so going back to like I don't want to risk what we have or what we need for something that we don't, right? So like we have this vision and we think we have the acumen and we're building this business model that can get to there organically and then scaling's deploying in more geographies, or we're in a very highly educated subject matter expertise as the structural engineer, not as focused on business. And a lot of boomer generation, which we were talking about 7 years ago, are still they're retiring and their businesses aren't necessarily transferable. So we're building really a platform company. We're open book financial management. Our
Hmm.
team understands enterprise value. We're like growing a team that can
So
actually
cool, dude.
integrate others. So at that stage, we're going to either grow through acquisition and organic growth, but acquisition through our own cash flow. And then this conversation, if we have the model where we can confidently do so faster, like we could potentially take on investment to achieve faster growth, but I wouldn't do that just to grow faster. There would have to be a lot of alignment with that equity partner or whoever that
Yep.
is wanted to deploy capital through our business. We wouldn't sacrifice our freedom or our ability to manage our mission, vision, and core values because we have some other new obligation to a financial partner. Like
Oh, amen, brother.
we don't need that. Like that's not
Why
critical
would
to
you
us.
want someone else to tell you what to do, right?
We're like I look at growth as growth isn't what we need. Growth is the result of doing a lot of things well. So if we create an environment where we attract top talent and create an environment for them to continue to grow personally, they're going to be capable of more. And then if we serve our customers and meet them where they need to be met and solve their problems, they're going to demand more of us and the market's going to learn more about that. So
Hmm.
those two things demand your company to grow. And so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
growth to me has to happen, but it doesn't need to happen at all costs. So that's not like
But and
what
you built the infrastructure and the goods. Like you were real with like, okay, so many things to unpack there, and I want to go. I'll probably thread these and loop them together. But the way I think about this and what you just said, it's like, okay, you built the infrastructure and the actual entity that is scalable, and and that is when I think about what does that mean, and as it relates to business, Rens, it's like, okay, you guys go into the marketplace and deliver a good and service with your time using the 8 functional areas, the people, and all that stuff. You say we deliver a good and service, and then the result of that value that we're creating with our time is sustainable cash flow, and that's the output. It's not the goal, right? So you the output, the input is you're delivering well, like professional services that other people need. The result after going through that kind of theory of constraints is that you have more sustainable cash flow, which then can go back in to create that feedback loop. And now that you've got that structure, you can then enhance it through M&A or through capital. But what I think is so wild, Rens, holy shit, dude, in the last 2 or 3 months, like, I mean, how many effed up PE deals I have heard from my past clients is like unbelievable.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot
like,
of them out there. There's a
and
dark
it-
side.
and like, and I have to put like a little caveat of like, I am not knocking all PE, right? So these are very individual conversations, but like, this is just like let's be aware of how the game is played, because the opposite of what you just did. So I had a guy, a client of mine runs, he got bought by a strategic that was backed by PE. Roll it all up, and concentrate the industry and sell it to BlackRock or Blackstone, and KKR. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
that's a new thought. And so yes, he got like tens and tens of millions of dollars. And I talked to him, and he's like, dude, he's like, I quit. It's a complete burning disaster. 90 grand a week with Deloitte. 25-year-olds, but $1,000 a month or $1,000 an hour of PowerPoints about integration runs, which is essentially just as the 8 functional areas, right? So, and I said, dude, do you still have the AS400? He's like, yeah, 3.5 years later, and the AS400, is a mainframe, right? He's spending 400 grand a year updating the GUI interface of this shitty mainframe. So there's zero capacity to execute integration, which essentially is just the 8 functional areas that you've honed in on, right? Which has to be the infrastructure for growth, because they're not creating more free cash flow. It's all this debt engineering to land the flaming bag of shit onto someone else. But you and I both know it's like, because what I'm tying that back to your risk and your goals, it's like by you understanding this, what I'm hearing you say is to do anything other than what you're doing is insanity.
I think so. Or people have other goals or at other stages of life. I think for where we are, like, to me,
But from
money
a
is,
business perspective, right? I mean, like how else, like
yeah.
how would you do it faster, right?
Yeah, I think you could look faster in the short term, but if you don't have your head up and understand how it plays out in a 5, 10 year or more window, then you end up having to unravel what you did to be able to go past that. And so if I put that into my context, so we launched our business, we service large scale commercial real estate, but we weren't executive level people when we started our firm in 2016. So we had to actually service smaller projects, houses, small commercial buildings, and then build to midsize. And so there was a point where we have to really manage our data based on our revenue, profitability by market sector and client type, and also how fast are we able to attract talent. It's a bull market. We're in a tier one city. Everybody is working already. So we're going to take somebody from a 30-year company and plug into our new small business doing buildings that are smaller than them. You got to have a pretty good value proposition. So we had to be patient early, and we didn't have to flood our business and overwhelm our team with small to mid-sized work that wasn't our core market sector that we were going to scale nationally with. So we've actually had to build the business and then recycle our revenue with large scale commercial real estate work. And now we're at that spot, and we're hitting
Mm-hmm.
that scalable phase where we can
Mm-hmm.
expand beyond where we're at.
Well, and back to it, which makes sense, which is what I'm hearing is like there. What other way was there to do that, right? Like it's like, okay, like back to like, is it possible? I can maybe said a different way. Rens is like back to the Huberman and Peterson. Like Huberman said, any dopamine that comes without work is bad, because like it's a risk reward system. So like
Pretty profound
if
statement. Yeah. If you
and
can
like
get
I
it
mean that's
without the work,
sacrifice.
then it becomes like a negative habit and ends up hurting your potential. I can see that.
100%. And this is where like, and I completely believe that. And that's like, I mean, it's been an internal battle forever for me. Dopamine, but it's like not good. Go do hard shit. And then it'll actually be the slow drip of dopamine. But how that relates to business, Rens, and money is like free money without work is, guess what? It's bad. Jay Powell, you can't just print shit. Like it doesn't work. And we all know that. And so when I think about business, it's like, okay, so you could go and what is that? How does that relate to business? It's like more cash today. You can go suck all the money out of the company, not invest in all that stuff that you're talking about, which to the short term would work, but the long term, it wouldn't. So it's just like more dopamine. It's like free to, there is no free lunch, I guess is my point. And you're like, by looking at how you're running your business and these thoughts and like the 8 functional areas and like risk, it's like you're balancing today with tomorrow.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, how
100%.
are you and Jeremiah having conversations around your like, because partnerships are always a like, because even thinking about this as an individual is hard, but like, how about the partnership dynamics? How do you guys handle that?
Partnership is one of the biggest decisions you're ever going to make, right? Like there's your spouse, your significant other, probably the most important decision in your life. And if you're going to go into business with a partner, that is right up there and a close number two. Um, I'm
Man,
very fortunate. I had some good advice. One, I got to work alongside my father for 4 years. So although I didn't have equity, that's very much a partnership, and you learn a lot. You've worked with your father. And my father-in-law had he's a real estate agent, but owned the brokerage with another partner, and they were at different phases of life. He had kids, his partner didn't. His partner was willing to work 100, he couldn't because he had kids. So I had some insights into the things that can create tension in a partnership early.
mm-hmm.
Jeremiah is a salt of the earth person, like of the highest integrity, great values, doesn't want to owe anyone a cent, like never wants to be under anyone, just wants to always be the one that's creating value. And so we had this awareness and exposure to partnership to really like have those questions and conversations early. And at its core, and I believe this to be true for him, and part of when you are signing up, I think the most important thing is even if you feel some negative tension towards a partner, if you're assuming negative intent, you think that they're doing something intentionally to harm you, negatively impact you to benefit themselves, you're in a really, really tough spot. It might appear that way. And if you start to feel that way, you need to just, as a partner, I need you to trust me that I'm not going to do that intentionally. And if I'm screwing up, like you need to tell me so we can talk about it, but it is not my intent. And then it's up to you to lead with that integrity. And when I look at my partnership with Jeremiah, I would go into the depths of bankruptcy back to square one before I screwed that guy out of a dollar. And there's two reasons. One, I value my relationship with Jeremiah more than I do money. And number two, I actually believe that we would make more money together going forward than we would individually, even if we had a big head start.
That's
Um,
awesome.
it's kind of that the partnership is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think when you have a great partnership, that's where it's at. And so we're both kind of aligned in values and needs. And at the end of the day, we live below our means, and we're living a great lifestyle. And we don't need to overextend that to put any of this other stuff at risk.
Awesome, dude. So happy for you.
Thank you.
Um, and
I
I
feel very
know,
fortunate for that and appreciate that guy.
yeah, and the insight and how well you articulated it doesn't come easy. Because
Not
I
easy.
cannot, because I understand and I'm completely on the same page as you, doesn't mean that getting that insight is very easy. And there's something that you said that dude, I hate the emotion of resentment so bad. It's like it's the grossest thing on the entire planet for me. And like I'll do anything to not feel that. And like and that whole like do people have good intent or bad intent? And that becomes such a messy situation. And like, one of the things that I'm trying to help people with this within this situation, Rens, is like I believe that generally human beings are good. What ends up happening, I think, is by not understanding certain things. So like, okay, like if you and I were partners, like let's say I wanted 300 grand this year and you didn't need any cash flow and you wanted to grow really fast and I couldn't because I needed some money and I had a family, like all that stuff that you just said. It's like, it really matters. Like we're like I think about that like the relay race where you have you're strapping 2 feet together, right? Like so you can't have one person just sprint while someone's sitting on the sidelines. Like like you have a cash flow equity strapped together machine and talking through this. So my belief is that generally people are good. Generally, there's a lack of understanding of this stuff of cash flow, equity growth, and all that stuff. And if people understand it and then have clear conversations, the result might be like, hey, dude, you want to run really fast, Rens, and I don't. That's hard because then there's this realization like the company's not worth what we need to. We can't afford the buyout. And like son of a bitch, like lots of hard things, but there was good intent, and then there's just a wrong situation. And then like, but I tend to believe, Rens, that because I believe most people are good, all of the bullshit stems from a lack of understanding, then a thinking from fear and scarcity. Because when you don't know, you have to protect yourself.
100%.
So, like, I don't know. I don't know if that resonates with you, but like, I'm
Absolutely.
hoping that that's the case.
If I were to, I'll jam on that for a second. So in a partnership, if you think back to those 8 functions of a business: planning, leadership, sales, marketing, people, operations, finance, and legal, especially when a business is small, somebody is going to be an expert at doing the work and in operations. That person probably doesn't understand the importance of planning and sales and marketing. And those functions don't drive dollars today. And so you can start to judge the performance of your partner based on your own strengths. And I think I'm always looking for people that are lifelong learners. That's why we bonded, Ryan. Jeremiah is one of those guys. He's an objective thinker and he's more curious than he is bullish on whether he's right or wrong. He's willing to test the hypotheses. That's core to our culture at H&O at this point. So it's when you can, if you can forgive your partner for their flaws and not try to judge them based on the things that you do you do well, your superpowers. Trust them to do their best based on their superpowers, and then try to put each other in a position to succeed. The second piece, and this is what you do a great service to the market, Ryan, is educating people on the balance of a business in all of those functions and really enterprise value. I think far too many people are afraid to admit that they don't understand enterprise value. And then so they make decisions and judge performance based on like their personal cash flow year over year. But but once you understand, hey, I'm making enough cash flow to support my lifestyle. I don't need more because I'm not looking to extend my lifestyle, but I do want to create compounding wealth. So a private business, a personal business like Jeremiah and I, if we can build an asset that we can deploy capital in, that capital is called an expense, which is tax deductible. So like a private business is by far the best vehicle to deploy capital in because it's an immediate 30 to 40% off the top because you didn't pay taxes that year. So you get compounding growth when you can do that well. So coming back to Jeremiah and I, we're objective thinkers, lifelong learners, aligned in values. We have that trust piece, but then we also look at if two partners, if one guy doesn't understand how the engine works or isn't contributing and helping build the engine, dumping money in almost feels like it feels a lot like risk, and it probably is if they're not building the engine. And so
And there's kind of 2 ways that I've seen that unfold, Rens. One is you could have like a dynamic of you and Jeremiah, and let's say he's not a lifelong learner, and he like there are times where like it works if one person blindly is like, don't give a shit how any of this works. Rens is my spouse, my business spouse. As long as I make 300 grand a year and Rens thinks we're going to be worth this, I literally don't care. And they're completely hands off.
that's okay.
But like, because I've seen that work doesn't make me, whether it's right or wrong is only that person's situation. But what I
Blind
see,
faith is uncommon.
well, right. And the
Yeah.
reason I think it's not only agreed, but also it usually doesn't last. Because what happens is you might have blind faith right now. And I'm always thinking about sustainability of the situation. I'm like, okay, well, there's blind faith right now, which is why there's no problems. But you wait till someone has a healthcare issue or someone has like some personal financial thing, and now all of a sudden it's like, boom, needs are different now. And now there's still the lack of education, but it's like, dude, I need the money, Rens. And you say I can't. Now it's like you versus me and all that. And it's just like it's so gross to me. And the way I think about like the ownership matrix, Rens, is like, okay, you were talking about you and Jeremiah having different skill sets in the 8 functional areas. The way I would word that is like that's your W-2 job, right? Like you're working and trading time for money, and so you're like that. You have a W-2 income from the business, but then if you go a step above that, you guys are investors, and investors and owners only have like 2 choices. Do we take more distributions or do we reinvest? And if we reinvest, what's the return? So like it's like separating these different things. So like you and Jeremiah having the right roles with the right compensation where you both feel like you're treating fair. And but then you have to be lockstep for like because like if you were like high growth and then Jeremiah was not, you would have to like reconcile like, well, Jeremiah wants more income through distributions, but you want to pile that back in. And what's our expectations on the out or the end of the equity? So like you and Jeremiah are not only looking at the love and trust, but then like you're operating on like 4 different levels together.
Sure. Yeah. The investor mindset is an important one for a business owner, and it's one people don't get exposed to. Like in a
How did
way,
you guys get there?
there's a certain level of investment, especially if you're growing, that's required to maintain that pace of growth and an insurance policy to that growth so that it doesn't then dive in 12 to 24 months. Right. And understanding the risks in a business. So if I look at that in our case, let's say professional services, you could be growing. Let's say you have the right amount of people, you've prepared for your growth, you're going to grow 50% next year, and you really only need to make a hire or two. But you're like, I could run a little lean and really optimize my bottom line that year and get a lot of cash and then figure out what to do next. But what if you were able to continue growing the next year? Or what if 2 of your key people had an opportunity that they couldn't pass up and had to leave your company despite loving your company? You've done everything right by them. They just
Hmm.
had
Hmm.
an opportunity they couldn't pass up. Now you're short and you are risking delivering on the quality that you sold that helped you capture this 50% growth. So what does that do to
It's
your
a,
enterprise value?
I
It's like
know, I know.
you need to build that awareness. And then that investor mindset is like, one, I'm trying to make sure I'm game, but I'm also trying to protect my future earnings, risk adjusted return.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Love it. Totally on the same page. You would you would have probably laughed your face off. I was in one of my client calls yesterday. He'll know who he'll be listening to this and he's gonna laugh. I was driving him effing nuts, Rens, because he looked at me, and because it's just like I don't again, I will never tell anybody what to do, but it's are we asking the right freaking questions? And do we have the right data to answer the question? So
Mhm.
he looked at me and he goes, all right, Ryan. So they doubled in growth last year and he thinks he can double again. So like 5 to 10 and then 10 to 20. And like it's probably going to happen, Ryan. And you should probably actually get to know him. So he looked at me and he goes, so we spent 11% of revenue on R&D last year. And he goes, so he pulls up his numbers and he's working on the 3 statement model. So I'm like, you gotta get the freaking 3 statement model. Otherwise I can't see the whole context. But he looks up and he goes, okay, so if we do 3 million in EBITDA, and then he shows like his taxes and a couple of, I'm like, working capital has to be in there because your receivables are gonna be huge. So anyways, there's all these components because his question is like, I'm like, dude, I want to see how much in distributions you want because like we need to figure out how much you're going to reinvest. But he's like, he goes to this the one cell that says R&D Rens. He's like, dude, I think $2.4 million is too much. And I was like, given what? Like, given what? Like, what
Yeah.
context? Because he's like, well, that's 15% more, or 15% of revenue, and last year it was 11. And I was like, okay, well, like, do you need that to get your revenue? Like, do you like what are the trade-offs of this? And it was like, and I kept not answering him, is my point. And like he just looked at me, he's like, can you effing just answer my question? I was like, I refuse because I don't know. Like, do you need 80% of that R&D to maintain that growth? Or do you need all of it? And like,
There's no
there's no margin of error.
And do you have the data to even know what you need to invest? And that comes back to like our conversation where like, do you know how to deploy capital confidently? Because
Right.
I just learned this lesson. I went to Alex Hermosi's scaling workshop in
I'm so
December
jealous.
to learn his framework, and one, it resonates with everything you and I do. It's a phenomenal framework for back a napkin like company valuations and how to like identify the most important constraints in a business. But one of the aha moments I had out there, I've been struggling with my marketing and sales engine. And I look at marketing and sales, your rev ops is, can I build a slot machine that if I
Mhm.
know I plug $10 in, it produces X amount, 50, $100. And how long does it take me to get that money? That is now an engine I know that I can deploy capital in. It's a really messy thing in most businesses, my business included. There's a lot of things going on. I've struggled to know like where to invest to know that I'm going to get a more return. So I
Yeah,
create
fair.
content
I
on
like it.
LinkedIn. I have a podcast where I interview top performers in our industries. And I know those are working, but I don't know if I double my investment, does that mean I double my revenue?
What's the confidence that you have that that's working? Like,
And
what's the
what I
conversion rate and all that,
realized
right?
was I don't have any data because I couldn't, attribution's really hard, but because attribution was hard, I just skipped organizing my data in any way. And they kind of pointed out, and my data is mint from like proposal activity to getting a new job to close revenue to all of our operations. Like we are data people, right? I'm an engineer. Our data pre sales opportunity was very disorganized and not really there and not centralized. And so now we're organizing that data. So now I know I have to make a bet. I have to make an investment, but I'll at least have the data in a big enough bucket to know that it worked in 3 months, in
Mhm,
6 months,
mhm,
and then I can
mhm.
improve and continue to invest.
Wait,
And
wait, wait, sales and marketing, you're like, I don't know how often you do like the rating of that VOP, but like, was it obvious or did you already know that before
I
going to this? Or
I knew it was a problem. So I knew I needed to solve like the difference between where we are and capturing like this organic growth to 20 million. To do it in a faster time frame than other than just like taking the next 10 years through like relationships is I needed to have my offer, which I got, and then I needed to have a predictable marketing and revenue distribution. So we had a slight decline in revenue, 15% in 23 after our biggest year ever in 22. And that was because I saw our pipeline go down, but I didn't have an engine that I could just turn it up and get more revenue. We had some big clients from long-term business development that helped shore us up, and then we're back to growing now. And really, we have like 60% growth this year
wow.
coming up. And that's like this engine's working, but it's not predictable. And it's not predictable because I don't have data. So without data, an investment feels a lot like gambling because it is gambling. And that
Mhm.
means chances are you don't know if you're putting it in the right place. You don't know when you're going to learn if you put it in the right place. And chances are you're not going to invest appropriately because like once you know that your engine works, you can deploy capital at that. And that to me, like our operations, our model can already grow to 100. It's really this sales and marketing engine and predictability of revenue growth. Like, do we understand how long it takes us to bring revenue in the door? And that to me is the difference between
Yeah.
saying small forever and scalability.
Oh, so many gold nuggets there, dude. So Renz, like what you said, um, like it's completely reconciles with what I see. I mean, I've seen inside of hundreds of companies' financials and like as a, like talking about value and all this stuff over the years, and that's another reason why I said like I can't believe the multiples that are getting paid and the valuations getting paid because I'm like I wouldn't know what to do with the money.
Mhm.
Like, and so like what, but here's what I think what you said is so insightful because like my audience hears me talk about the three statement model a lot. That's where Pat indoctrinated me on that. And it's like, okay, so if we've got your income statement ties to the balance sheet, ties to the cash flow statement, we can see your free cash flow into the future. If you do all these things, so you can sit down and you can build out your income statements and here are my revenue lines, my cog lines, and here's my SG&A. And that will result in I'll have this working capital, debt, and taxes in the middle of next year if we do these things. I've got the highest probability or like a 50-50 chance of hitting this. But then okay, like let's assume we have all that going on. Okay, you got the 8 functional areas and we're like all like looking at that machine. The leading indicators, like how are you generating that revenue to your exact point. You could sit there and you and I could sit in a back room and just make shit up. And it's like, well, how is that going to happen? And what's so fascinating to me, Ren's, like, and it took me years, and my eyes is probably sick of me hearing me say this, but like, I got weirdly, I was the opposite of what you just said. Like when I started in the family business, no org chart for 110 people, ERP system. I had no idea how much inventory was in 24 vehicles. Like, I mean, it was just revenue, but like but Ren's, like the business that I grew up in, and I know it's different today because of online content marketing and a lot of the stuff that Alex Ramonti talks about, but like 22 sales reps, 400 phone calls, 15 appointments, 7 net news, 5 proposals, 40 grand in revenue every single month, every single rep. The moment
Without
they didn't
fail.
hit that, without fail,
Yeah.
33% of the funnel closed every single goddamn month, like without fail. And so,
And if
like,
you
I
have, I
got
mean,
used
that's
to
a
that.
10-figure business if you have that kind of engine, for sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's and back to your point, it's like we always knew we're gonna hire another salesperson, but like we were way out of balance. It was like, all salespeople.
Revenue
No.
wasn't your constraint. You had solved that hard part. And the other ones are like this understanding of how do you
Yeah.
shore that up? Because if you have a dial on revenue, like what a gift that is in business.
Well, and I think it's back to, and I'd be curious if you want to unpack a little bit with the Hermazzi, like what, because like it's so fascinating what you what you're pursuing. I think is also something that is outside of the finance. I mean, like I end up going to finance because I find Rens, a lot of the owner operators, like they're really good at like organically getting the growth. There's a big personality. They're really good at their trade or skill or something. And then it's like, we got to fix this, like, so you can get visibility into your free cash flow. Then we can go back up and say, like, where are we going to place our bets? But like, when I look at the sales and marketing, it's like, okay, you have a customer journey, like that customer journey. And like, it starts with like marketing and depending on your industry, your size, your company, you might have like different touch points. So you might be trade shows, it might be podcasts. It might like, I've got a client, Jimmy Fritz, who's just on a buddy, e-commerce. It's like, he's a data engineer, Rents. I mean, like he's spending insane amounts of money because he knows exactly like how many ads, where they go, how many like different try-ons, how many appointments, how much, and like all the way through. But then like, how is Alex Ramazzi and like, what are you doing to like make sure that you're increasing your visibility to leading indicators so that way you can predict what revenue falls on the income statement?
I'll talk to the strategy. One, this comes from attracting your top clients, attracting talent to your team. It's like, do your core avatar, do your target clients even know you exist in the value that you provide? So you have to be visible, right? That's a brand marketing, that's content marketing, that's growing through goodwill. And then the next piece that was really
Did you
trans.
know, are you making the assumption that someone knows their core avatar at that point? Because I
I
think that's sometimes an issue.
Well, I would hope so. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
one of
It's,
the top 5 constraints in a business, one can be poor pricing that can suffocate your business. If you don't know how to price your work appropriately, like, and you have cash constraints, I guarantee your pricing's broke.
insert Casey Brown, boost pricing. Check out that podcast.
Check that out.
Yeah.
One of those is your target client. Do you have the right offer to the right client, or are you trying to serve the wrong person? Like, I look in my business, for us to be successful, my clients have to be successful. So, like, if I'm trying to serve a real estate developer that's not confident in what they're doing and doesn't understand like the risk that they're taking and how to de-risk to create the opportunity and realize the upside to have successful investors and pay off their debt, it's really hard for them to speak highly of us after that if they lose money on a real estate development. So, like, am I getting to a level of sophistication where they are confident that they're going to be successful so they can invest in my services to help them be more successful or to reduce their risk? It's really hard to get somebody to pay a premium for a service if they're not confident that they're going to be successful in a deal.
Mhm.
They're going to
Yeah. The outcome has to happen.
they're going to look cost. They're not thinking investment. They're thinking cost and reducing their
Yep. Yep.
costs.
I love it. Yep.
So the other part with Alex Hermosi, so we talk about the avatar. Are you serving the right thing? I am in real estate design, construction, development. the most mature industries in the world. Like people have been designing and building buildings since the beginning of man, right? Very easily to be commoditized. And if you look across it, people really market by just showing a sample of their portfolio and the buildings they do, and then speaking to service, to listening, to support throughout the process. But once you're in a certain level of that game, you're kind of perceived as the same, unless you've had a working history with the client, which makes net new sales really, really, really challenging.
Yeah,
Most
bursting through that relationship barrier is huge.
most of my competitors have been in business for 30, 40 or more years. And same thing with like real estate developers. A lot of the big players, it's like a small pond once you actually get into it.
Hmm.
And they've all been working together, so they have relationships. And like if you and I had a successful career for the next 25 years, and then like young Ryan and Rens try to like take work from us, we're gonna be like, yeah, we don't really care. Like, see ya.
I think, by the way, yeah, you and I can both resonate with how freaking hard that is, man. It's like, oh my God, yeah.
So you're just chopping wood for years until you're kind of in that same position. Um, but I'll share something from Alex Ramosi, and I'm sure plenty of your listeners are exposed to him. But his concept of make an offer so good people feel stupid saying no resonated with me so much. It's like
Mhm.
I can't just be marginally better. I have to be selling something that somebody's not, and I have to make it so like my client needs this more than ever that I can get in and I can reduce that sales cycle. So a new sales cycle in the industry that I just described can be years. And that's not like years like to get in and say hi and have a meeting. That's like 10 touch points in a pretty good personal relationship before you get a look. Like that's been plenty of my experience. And then
Mhm.
you set off a great relationship that can go for 2 or 3 decades.
Yep.
The offer that we came up with, so one, we started measuring the cost of our buildings. Engineers don't measure costs. I might be going a little off track, but I'm just going to
No,
keep.
no, dude, I, I'm interested. So keep going.
So engineers design the structure of buildings. The actual cost of the structure of a building is like 60, 70, 80 times more than an engineering fee. So just with saying that, like, do you think a developer is successful because they bought low fee engineering services when the result of those services impact something 80 times more expensive? So in the industry, it's a mature industry, which means you're kind of like you have legacy hurdles in the industry that already exist. 20 years ago, we didn't have the software for engineers to be able to like estimate a building efficiently. We do now, but like old habits die hard. Companies don't do it. It's perceived risk. We're generally risk averse type of people. And so I just recognized money, the cost of the buildings is what helps our clients make decisions and be and like reduce their risk and achieve success. And wouldn't it be wise for us to put our expertise in the same language that our customer speaks? So we train our engineers in estimating. We estimate every building we design, and then we collect all of that data and put it in a dashboard on every project so that we can collectively get buy-in and learn from the experience on it. And just a 5% improvement, which like you're a health fitness guy, if you start measuring something, you're generally finding more than 5% improvement, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But another way, it would be ridiculous to think that you could be 95% optimized in anything if you haven't measured it.
Yeah. Right. Right.
That move on structural efficiency can move 1% of hard cost of a building. So when you're doing large scale real estate, a building might cost 100 million bucks. So just by having a process in place to measure it during design to inform better decisions can move $1 million. There's no guarantees, but we have a bunch of case studies and results that show that. And the new offer we layered on top of that to come at the industry from a different angle is we have a no risk peer review to reduce costs of another building design. So it's a massive market. There's way more buildings that H&O doesn't design that we do design. And people are seeing that we measure costs. So if you were developing a building, you could send me the plans and you don't owe me a dollar unless I help you save 100 grand or more. I
That's
think
a pretty good
that
offer.
I think it's a great offer. And we're finding 500,000, 600,000, 800,000, million, million two. Like we're finding real money in these. And part of my strategy as we go to grow nationally is this offer to me gets me in the door with a decision maker, I think in a much shorter period. So now I don't have this 2-year runway to where I have an actual engagement. I have a much easier, irresistible offer to get into the room and build a relationship and help somebody get a win early. And so if I can reduce my CAC and my CAC payback period and accelerate my sales cycle, I can acquire customers faster than anyone in the market.
And then it it continues for 2 to 3 decades, like you said. So now that you're accelerating that acquisition part, and like what I love it, dude. I love it so much. And so here's what I heard out of that, which I am not shocked at all about, is you are tying your goods and services to the outcome of your clients. And like, and so like, and I'm so curious because like, I mean, like, again, you're a structural engineer and you went to the VOP, and like you and I are both systems thinkers, right? And like, and because where I landed was first principles, right? And like, and I even say to anybody, like on any of those 8 functional areas, I mean, for God's sakes, I sold IT services and copiers, right? So like but like the moment I thought like this, it's like, well, guess what? Every company just wants more free cash flow and enterprise value. So like if as long as like if the name of the game of capitalism is more sustainable cash flow so you can increase the multiple, it's like every single product or service and goods or service in the world could be sold in that. And I think the problem with professional services and goods and services, Rens, and all the consultants and all that shit is like no one has any idea how what they do ties to the outcome. And guess what? The people like you and I, who are also your customers, who are managing payroll and like are like, you're responsible for it, right? You know whether you have more free cash flow or not, right? And so like what happens is I think all of the dissatisfaction with all these service providers are like, there people are just doing random shit, friends, everywhere. And then just like if
They're
everybody
working in
could
the
clear,
tunnel. Yeah. They have
yeah, and
blinders.
you're working for, would you say working from the middle, but not having like any idea, like, so you went in there and said, hey, I know what matters to you. And here's how what you're doing. And then here's how I fit into the value growth supply chain.
Exactly.
Is that a fair? I mean, it seems
Yeah,
like
I
a
think
no.
it's a great analogy. At the end of the day, there's I forget who said the quote, but it's like people don't buy a quarter-inch diameter drill bit because they love drill bits. They buy it because they need to drill a quarter-inch hole to achieve a goal. So it's just understanding how your expertise plays into helping somebody else achieve their goal. And if you can position and talk about it in that lens, I, the parallel to that one is just like a sales and being able to connect to your client. But if you can't do that in a business, it's impossible to have a team of 20, a team of 100, a team of 500 people make decisions in alignment if they don't understand how to connect to their avatar. So when you can simplify it, it improves the judgment of a team that makes it scalable. Because without that clarity, it's not scalable because you can't expect an entire team to have judgment without alignment. And that aligns people to what we're trying to achieve.
And Joel Trammell, very fascinating guy. I don't know if he'd
American
be,
CEO. Yep.
yeah, has he been on your show? You should have him on.
I should. I actually took I had a call with him for like an hour. I think he's a super bright guy. And I'll let you continue, but I'll share a piece of advice he shared with me that I thought was excellent.
It's about greasing the wheels of decision making, right? But like in the way I think about how all of what you're saying ties in, because all this stuff ties together. Where like we want to see the future, and then how do we engineer the future with the highest probability, right? And what does that mean? We're all providing goods and services that result in more free cash flow. And we want to then make sure that all that's aligned and we're placing our bets of time and money and the highest probability. And that's how we align all of the operations, right? Like, I mean, to not do that in an organization's operations where the ownership team has to say, this is what we need for free cash flow, and this is what we need for value growth. Otherwise, we're making shit up. And I think that there's a lot of people in the PE space where they don't want to just say, like, by the way, the goal is to make all this money for these 12 people. Like, I mean, so like, by just not saying that, everyone's just randomly doing shit. And in ESOP, that's why I think ESOP or open book management, like you're talking about, has a higher probability of like, hey, it's very obvious that we're all doing this together. And I'm not judgmental runs on any of these ownership structures, but just admitting like private equity versus ESOP versus owner operator with one individual owner, they're all different. The person that's the shareholder is going to get the free cash flow and the value. So we let's just say it what it is, but then operations needs to be aligned via the income statement. You know, like you're running open book management, like every GL code is a freaking person. And anything short of this is just making shit up in my mind. And I'm sitting here going like, well, like how I don't know, man. Like, what do you think about that?
It's why I advocate for lifelong learning. And when I see people in leadership positions that aren't actively trying to gain new perspective through books, through mentorship, through coaching, through podcasts, through like CEO groups or something, it raises a red flag to me, because if they're not growing through some avenue of learning and opening up new perspectives, they're going to have blind spots, and they're going to have more than those that don't. So that to me, like when you say like, how do you not connect these things and make decisions that open up free cash flow, and what creates stability for that in the long term? It's not that they don't want that, it's that they don't understand what moves actually increase the stability of that cash flow long term.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to me, it's a learning, it's an ignorance thing more than like they're trying to be deceptive. Like
Yep.
going through Jack Stack in the great game of business, that's open book financial management, and chances are most of the people in your audience are not running open book financial management. And I think we'd all admit it's a pretty daunting decision, because people are going to see whether you make money or don't make money. They're going to see risk. They're going to see what you do and don't know. So you're going to be vulnerable to like the webs in the cloud.
Are you sharing the cash flow statement and the balance sheet, or is it just the income statement? And what level? What level of open does open mean for you?
Yeah, we do. Our team reports the P&L to us on every single Monday.
Okay.
And Jeremiah and I, again, professional services are pretty clean. We're not actively talking through. It's not like that we hide it, so like it becomes known here and there. We don't actively. Our cash flow is healthy and our balance sheet is healthy. And
You're not sitting on
Jeremiah
inventory, right?
and
And big payables,
Jeremiah
probably.
and I leave way more cash in the business than it actually needs. So
Hmm.
like we actually have to go back and kind of determine what our working capital actually should be, so that we could
Hmm.
actually measure it appropriately. Right now, it's like this inflated sense of security because we just have all this cash sitting in the
Yep.
business.
Yep.
We put that to work in like treasury bills or high yield interest accounts,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
but right
No,
now,
it's
in
good because like
execution of the business, we do the P&L, and then so we have a team wide bonus plan tied to company performance. And
yep.
so the team knows exactly where their bonus sits every single Monday. And then
Dude,
they
Jim, one of my good friends, Jimmy Fritz, was just on the podcast, and Pat's actually his CFO. And Jimmy's a good buddy, and he's been indoctrinated with all of my shit for like 8 years now. And he just did this too. He's like, I'm so sick and tired of doing everybody's job. I want to grease the wheels of decision making all the way down. Now he's tying people and their jobs to the income statement. And again, back to then how he's running EOS, not the huddles, but I mean it's the same thing, right? So, but now everybody knows like you're on track or off track, and he goes, and if you're off track, tell me what you're going to do about it. If I have to tell you what we're going to do about it, what am I paying you for? And so he's like flip the power dynamics, but that should be empowering for the right people, right, Rens? And then even in like, I'm curious on what your sales and marketing structure looks like, because again, if you have the income statement, your revenue is being generated by either sales or marketing or someone. So who's responsible for them, and how is this Hormozy? I'm always say, is it Hormozy? God, I just screwed up every time. Hormozy. But with Hormozy's process, like then you're generating KPIs and comp plans tied to the probability of getting that revenue on those lines. Because then as you get into cost of goods, margins become like, I mean, it's more measurable, and then SG&A are more measurable, where like you're trying to break through that equation to increase the probability of sustainability of getting that revenue, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we have our metrics for like proposal opportunities, which is like essentially a sales cycle. It's high ticket professional services tied to real estate cycles. So our sales cycle can be very long. Sometimes we get a proposal a year ahead of time before we actually get to work on a project. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's a week. So we have to have a model to be able to ask the right questions and then introduce that into our system to have better predictability. We understand close rates. With that kind of aha moment where I relearned a lesson I learned thousands of times in a new area of my business of collecting and organizing this data for marketing. We need to plug that in to understand how marketing efforts create net new like customer business and what that lifetime value is over. So we're going to be putting all of our marketing on our sales spend and trying to like have attribution touch points. That's going to be messy, but we have like these core avatars, and we're going to be tracking that over periods of time, quarterly, annually, and probably even 24 months because of how long this is, to see how changes in our marketing impact changes in our sales cycle.
Who's responsible for that project and that
Right
stuff?
now, you're looking at it. But that's
So,
why. So if I go back to why I've struggled to, I've wanted to professionalize and scale my marketing team. I have somebody that helps with the podcast. I have somebody that's helping with some of the content. I'm still very heavily in on the content. I need to scale, I think, both of those. But I'm kind of taking on too much to become that bottleneck. But I haven't had data to be confident in who do I hire first. I've never built a marketing team. A salesperson, I'm really a sales team. What I've learned is a salesperson can take 15 meetings a day. If you give me one meeting a day with a real lead, I'll build $100 million business. So it's like, I don't need this. A sales team can help go out and drive like new value. But it's like, if we have our offer and our engine behind that, that makes it highly more profitable, then I can add on these other. So it's like, what
so then
order?
is it deploying your content then to the right associations, to the right publications, to the right events? Is it a combination of all these different touch points where your content will be the gravitational pull to connect all of those things? Or
Yeah, I mean, there's the offer, there's the distribution, and there's these buckets. But right now, if I spend more money in one, I don't have confidence that that's going to generate a new result. I know that it generally works. I just don't know if it needs more money to generate more. And it's okay to not know that with 100% certainty. I think there is some gambling and testing in this world. But if you don't have the data, you don't get to learn from the spend. So right now I spend and I don't necessarily learn.
yeah,
Now,
right.
once I
Right,
organize
right,
my
right.
data, I can start to learn from the moves that I make, and it gives me more confidence to make that strategic hire, to invest in deploying this for 6 months to see how things change. And I can now start to watch how that plays out.
I love it. How does that how do you think about the phase of learning? So here's what I mean by that. Because like I've got a couple other clients that I'm working with were like around your size, and actually they just hired two salespeople and they're going through marketing, and they got a commercial line of business and a residential line. Um, and it's like we're not going to get to good right away. So like, you're not going to have all the perfect data. So like my suggestion was like, hey, give yourself a grace period of like you're going to be eating shit, and you're spending money to see what works, so that way you can figure out where the bets could be placed. So like, how do you think about chunking this phased approach, or how do you think about this?
In spending money here, I feel like I intuitively know what I need to do, but I'm scared to waste money on it. But if I can track it, I'm more confident in the importance of making it. And we already have this growth and we have this vision. And so I like to go through the cost of inaction. I'm sure most people know Tim Ferriss. If you have seen his TED talk on his fear analysis, it's really like an act where you go through what's the cost of inaction. So we think we can better serve the market, better serve more clients, better create opportunity for our team and the future people that will join our team. And so it's like, if I don't invest in these areas, we won't be able to fulfill that. So it's like, my cost of inaction is we don't build the company we know we're capable
Lack of your potential, back to your earlier
of
point,
our
right?
potential. So then if I've already got my lifestyle secured and I know that like if I were to fail in these investments that they don't change my life, they don't negatively impact my life. These are investments that are necessary to achieve our long-term mission and vision.
Mhm. Makes sense on how that's pulling you towards solving this problem, which then is there like micro steps or phases that you've like, or milestones I should say, where like maybe in 2025 is it 6 to 12 months, and that you're willing to not have it perfect, where like do you have a different, maybe say a different way, like in 24 months I want this level of visibility so I know how to deploy this level of capital, but we're not, it's going to take us a little bit to build that structure. Does that
I'll
make sense?
I'll step back into some of my journey as a leader, and I think where Jeremiah and I have been aligned in this type of growth. There's two types of risk you can take when you're trying to do stuff that you haven't done before. There's financial risk and there's execution risk. I think when you're small, it's important to not put yourself at financial risk, because if you fail with financial risk, you lose resources, and you potentially sink the ship. So that means when you're small, you have to take execution risk. So that was me saying, I know from my CVGA, my M&A exposure, we need to learn how to market. I don't know who to hire. We've never marketed before. We don't run ads. I know people follow people, and then content is really a part of building an audience and being known. Our customers are there. I can go straight to them on LinkedIn. I'm going to start writing content on LinkedIn. Never posted on social media, not a social media guy. I had just read books and ran businesses for a decade, so I had stuff to talk about. And so I just started talking about business. I started talking about things I thought people would be interested in. I started studying content. I started studying copyright, and I improved. So I de-risked this area of our business that I knew we needed to grow by just taking it on my own personal execution. And so going back to alignment with the partner, Jeremiah, also a lifelong learner, knowing we want to build a business. Although he doesn't understand marketing, he knows we got to figure out marketing. So it's like, all right, Rens, like you take that burden and go try to figure it out. And like, he's the guy optimizing operations, testing new things in the field of engineering and innovating and working on developing technology. I don't have anything to do with that. So like, we know he's spending his time and his resources, and that we built the team and the systems to actually deliver the product. So him and I work on growth things, and we have the team that deliver on the stuff that are core business.
Awesome. That's awesome.
And now we're at the stage of our business where if we continue to try to grow that way, we become the bottleneck, because it takes a lot of time. I've been writing content in 4 years. I started a podcast 2 years ago. I still don't have the data, and I don't have my slot machine to know how to deploy capital. I failed at hiring agencies to help me figure that out. And it came back to, I went to Hermosi, to somebody that's doing this every day, and he was like, you don't have data to make a decision. I'm like, you're right. Like, I've overlooked the importance of this data. So now we're at the point where time is more of a constraint, and our time is more of a constraint. So we need to get good at deploying capital to acquire skills that we don't have yet. We need to find the who, not how are we. We need to find the right people. And I'll share another thing that from Hermosi's, I'm like, who's the first person I hire? Like for marketing, and I'm talking to his holding company team. Like, how do you make that decision? I failed at hiring agencies. And this is, again, a lesson that you and I have both learned, and I just continue to learn lessons in new ways. It's like, interview 25 agencies, interview 25 content and marketing people, not 2. If you interview 25 people and you actually think about what you're trying to achieve, and you ask them what you think they think you should be doing, you're going to find the top 3, and you're going to know exactly what you want. And it's like, it's just volume. It's just like, it takes more effort than you want to admit to achieve a result that you desire. And it was like that lesson again in a nutshell. So when I look forward, I am getting my data so I can learn faster. And then I'm going to be making strategic decisions with my capital to try to acquire skills to help us achieve this next level of growth.
It reminds me so much. Have you read Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb?
I have not.
I thought for sure you would have. He's the author of The Black Swan. Like the most brilliant statistician, probability. I mean, the guy's insane. But Anti-Fragile, like, to summarize the word, it's like, well, fragile means easily broken. And he was like, well, there was no word for the opposite, because sturdy is rigid. And I was like, huh. It's okay. And he's like, well, what's the opposite of fragile? Well, anti-fragile, you're
durable.
Anti-fragile is like what is the word he created, because if you think about your muscles, when you work your muscles, you break them down and they get bigger.
Yep.
But like how he brought this into, and he's the one that's like the handle or the barbell investing, where it's like, okay, here's how I'm thinking about what you just said, based on constraints and risk and return of time and money. It's like, okay, he said, like, in this hit me like square between the eyes, Rens. It was years ago I read it. It's like, if you place all these bets, so like if there was like all these like columns and all these bets, what's the lowest risk that you have and the highest amount of exposure you can have in this? So that way, when you get all the exposure, you go, this one.
Yeah.
So like you're increasing your odds of decision making, saying, I have all of this exposure. I've interviewed 25 agencies. Not only do I have all the data, I have 25 agencies. it's like, because time and cash was the biggest constraint. So it's like, I want to make the highest probability bet.
Mhm.
And it's just like, it's a very fascinating, because like, that's how I've operated my entire life. After that, it's like lowest risk, highest exposure. So I had the highest probability of making the best amount of bets given my constraints.
Exactly right. It's I look for risk asymmetry, and what I mean
Yeah.
by risk asymmetry, heads I potentially win big, tails I don't lose much.
Right.
If I
Yep.
can make as many of those bets, or like heads I know I win, tails I don't lose really. I
Yep.
love those types of bets, and especially
Yeah.
to date, I've done those largely with execution risk.
I like it. I like it. I know we can keep going. I want to respect your time, man. So fun, man. I don't know if, is there
I
anything
love
else that like we caught up on a lot. I feel
I
like this is,
I actually have a question I would like to throw back to you from your
yeah. Yeah.
experience in growing businesses that I think would be helpful. We're going to be in this period of our growth, um, where we're growing from founder-led leadership to building out an executive team as we scale. So scaling to 50 to 100 people, right? Like you're really building out your executive team during that time. What exposure and advice do you have to business owners that are kind of going from that founder led leadership to building out a leadership team? And I'll preface that with the challenge that I see there. The seasoned executives have done it and are part of bigger companies and probably don't want to go back to your size company to do it again, or they're too expensive that your business can't afford in a current cash flow. So it's like you'd want them on the team now, but you can't afford them because you can't drive the results fast enough to warrant the investment. And then there's the people that haven't done it before, that have a lower probability of success and some longer winding lessons learned, but you can afford them. So how do you walk through that? What questions do you ask? How have you seen people do this well?
Fantastic questions. I don't have a hard cutoff. You good? Because I want to give you
I'm
my
good.
thought
Let's rock.
thinking. So I think it's important that I lay out how I think before giving any specific advice, because I don't like anybody listening in here probably doesn't like to be told what to do, and I know you don't either. So like it's more about understanding like the landscape of the game first. So experience. I'm not. By the way, everything that's going to come out of my mouth, I've stolen from someone else. So if you've stolen from me, you've stolen twice. I also stole that phrase.
Yeah, I
So
think that's kind of true for everybody. Like,
yeah, yeah. I'm not on the
we've
show.
read so much over the last decade. It's like I don't even know where these ideas came from
Yeah,
anymore.
agreed. Agreed. My friend Brandon Henry said, experience is what we get when we don't get what we want. I was like,
Great,
oh, that's,
great line.
and why that resonates to your question. And I'll continue laying a couple of these cinder blocks together is so many of us founder operators ate shit for a long time. And then whether it's your son or daughter, or if it's the next executive, you expect them to be just like you. But the only reason you're you is because you didn't get what you wanted. And so like there's this, and back to Bo Burlingham and the identity and like your skill set, like what you're gonna come out the other side of this sales and marketing experience. And you could probably start a sales and marketing course and do webinars about how to sell sales and marketing. I mean, like but like it's because you're going through the experience. I mean, my mind, experience is the definition and the purpose of life. So what we're trying to do is build a machine, right? So like my assumption is we cannot find a way to replicate ourselves. But what we can do is we can start to break down the big idea of like you and Jeremiah need to create a next level management, which is leverage over your time for operations as you move from operations to ownership, where you're becoming more of a capital allocator. Is that a fair way of kind of like you're trying to leverage your time and get on top of the cash flow and equity heap, but you still need some direction. Joel Trammell and I were talking about this too, and how to do this. So the way I think about it is like, okay, well, what's the ultimate goal that we're trying to do? The ultimate goal is that, I mean, I just make some kind of conceptual like generalizations here. An org chart of a company has a CEO that is responsible for the outcome of the financials. That doesn't have to, they might have phantom stock or some short term bonus plans, but that CEO has got a W 2 income, and their W-2 income for trading time is to make sure that that income, balance sheet, and cash flow statement is tied to ownership's goals. And if they don't do that, they're fired. I mean, that's private equity firms make it very clear, and same thing with public companies. Owner operators and ESOPs should have that kind of clarity too. But that CEO is responsible for the revenue, the cost of goods, and the overhead to get to ownership's cash flow and equity goals. That's step number one. Then the third step is we have revenue, geo codes, then cost of goods, then overhead, sales and marketing, ops, production, and finance. We should have three people. So oddly enough, it's the three buckets of the income statement, and then it's the three buckets of EOS. Like those three people report to the CEO, and they're responsible for having a compensation plan tied to the CEO's goals, tied to the ownership's goals of free cash flow and value growth. So like first principles, we got ownership has to determine their cash flow goals of normalized EBITDA and free cash flow and the multiple within the period of time. Get a CEO to say, okay, the CEO box has to be responsible for doing this. And that owner operators might play a couple hats, but then there's the three functions. And then we say, okay, well, there's three, like to have more than one person responsible for revenue lines, you're gonna like more than one person responsible for like the ultimate revenue.
Create room for excuses is what it does.
Yeah, I mean the ultimate revenue. Like you guys will make $20 million or not. You guys will hit 50% margins or not, and you guys will hit whatever X amount of net income or not. And if you don't, who's responsible for it? So you're doing all this stuff. So I'm saying all this because like my mind is like this. All of this shit has to be abundantly clear because any deviation away from this, room for conflict, excuses, avoidance of responsibility. So it's like, okay, all of this as a level set. Now it's like, okay, what's the future org chart look like? So if I say, okay, with the organization at $35 million, or let's say it's 40, let's say you're going to double in 3 years. You say, okay, from 20 to $40 million,
Yeah,
we need a 3-statement model.
we're on our way for 20, but in that way, in that conversation, just say 20 to 40. That's fine.
Yeah, just all I'm trying to do is like we have to have a point A and a point B. There's a pegged set of financials today, and there's a pegged set of financials because we have to see the constraints of time and cash flow, right? So then we go, okay, then what's the skill set that we need to get us there? And I'm gonna go. I've got your 2 questions down, and so I'm trying to back into like how would I think about this? Like, okay, well, like if we're gonna go for 20 to 40, like the a couple of the mistakes that I have for sure made, and I know some of my clients have is I'm going to hire someone, and Mike Vermelt has been on the podcast a couple of times. He's fantastic. So this is coming from my own experience, but then more articulated from a systems thinking lens of Mike Vermelt from Strategic Talent Partners, and then and Joel Trammell and Craig Rutledge, where it's like, okay, do we have a $10 million executive team working at a $20 million company? Like we want to hire someone that's just right up, like we want to hire someone that's been at the 40 million. You know, someone that like I see the biggest mistakes, Rens, is like people they go hire the big person from the big company. It's like, dude, they had I got a client right now. They had an expense report. They're like, hey, corporate, I need $25 million. It's like, you know, this thing called juggling working capital of, you know, debt payments. You got the payables, receivables, inventory. So like there's this, we want to hire someone slightly above, like in the future org chart, hiring them, but then it's like, when can we afford them? Because I mean, in this situation, you might be at 23 grand a month for a CEO, and then 15 grand a month for those other 3 executives. Like, well, shit, we can't afford any of those. Well, Jeremiah and Rens are going to play those until we can hire a fractional. But the fractional firms out there, Rens, are generally shit because they're not tied to.
They're not aligned.
Unless
maybe they try to be, but like it's still like if you're building a long-term company, you need to get it in-house, and you can use fractional services to help get there.
Yeah, and it's so let me finish my thought on the fractional, then the full, and then I'll go. And I'm going back to one of your questions. Then it's like, so I think because I mean, if it's a cash flow constraint of when we can hire these people, I mean, there's an order you can do this in.
Fractional CFO, I think, is absolutely necessary for like all small businesses.
Yeah, I would also say that 95% of fractional CFOs are accountants and don't know shit about 3-statement forecasting. So like, I mean, but like same thing with CMOs. I mean, you want to light 400 grand on fire, go hire someone that does SEO and you don't need SEO. So like this is all an order of operation that comes with everything I've talked about so far. Like, and you're a structural engineer, right? Like if you don't do it right, the building falls down. And so like, I think about this, Rens, it's like, okay, like if the higher probability of hiring a good fractional is for the person that's making the decisions from the ownership or the CEO to know exactly what the outcome is. then you can slot the person in, and then they don't have to come up with the outcome. They have to come up with how they're going to get to the outcome. And so I say all this because like I am extremely bullish on hiring good people for those like leadership spots.
I would hope so. Yeah.
If
Good people matter.
if well, not only do they matter, it's the only way out, dude.
Yeah.
And like I had a PE firm, Rens, and I was like, okay, this is like years ago. I said, hey, how much does the leadership team, because leadership is one of the 8 functional areas. I'm like, how much does that impact the multiple? He's like, it doesn't. I'm like, I don't know. Explain to me why. He goes, we're not buying a company without management, a good management team. So he's like, it's a deal or no deal. Because like they're the ones that have to do the work, because PE firms don't go in there to the operations, right? So
Yeah.
so I say this because if all of this stuff is together, there are seasoned people, like you had said, that, dude, having a fast decision making frame or company with like you and Jeremiah, my God, I've watched people take 15% haircut just to go have the upside. Say like, hey man, I'll take a little bit less base, but if I
Yeah.
have
I think you got to go performance based, right? You got to give upside and tie it to results.
but that's an easy statement with to be said.
Hard
But
to-
if I didn't say, but you and Jeremiah have done all the hard work to say, hey, this is exactly where we're going to measure all that shit. Like most of the people, Rens, I think that are why really good executives. I had a guy in my Vistage workshop this week, and he's like, he's a CEO of an ESOP now. And he goes, my entire career, I've been working for family businesses, and I usually replace family or like, and I'm like, dude, you must have just some like desire for perpetual pain because of the conflict. But like good people like him are totally open. Like if it's super clear what the goals are, how the metrics are, you can attract that top talent.
Yeah, you need
And
that.
then they're going to believe in the variable pay. And then we can hire the people that are slightly more experienced than where we're at.
Mhm.
But like you're providing this like safe home with I mean, it's back to kids, right? Like,
What we're
hey,
trying to do.
you can go play, but here are the boundaries. And like you go outside those boundaries, I'm gonna snap you back in. So
Yeah.
that's a long answer, but like what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you get it. It becomes a cash flow thing, and I think where I've built my vision on building out that executive team, it comes back to like figuring out this revenue engine. Because if I know my CAC, my LTV, and my CAC payback, I know I can grow revenue. So now I need an executive team to help shore up the other aspects of my business. And that to me becomes a much more confident bet and investment because I know I can grow revenue. And now my cost of inaction is I can't capture the revenue because I'm not building out the rest of my business to continue to grow with that capacity. Until then, it's like it's hard to invest in an executive that's like good at certain things on the functional side of the business when you don't have a dial on revenue. It's like I got to get the dial first, or that's my first investment in the person that can help build that model for me.
Well, and
And that's like what
let's
I'm actively working on. Because once I
yeah,
solve that, then it becomes crystal clear.
I'm tracking and let's so like the way I kind of think about those trade-offs. So and this is why I have to look at a set of financials and like understand the strategies and the plan. So like I have no idea about your numbers, but this is just like an order of operation thought process. Like, okay, if cash flow is the issue because you and Jeremiah both have the salary and distributions that you want plus the reinvestment, you're going, okay, like right now it's Rens's time is what I heard is the constraint. So then it's like, okay, if you were to do like the whole Dan Sullivan or whatever it is, like list all the shit you're doing, and then it's like, what is all the stuff that is not part of solving this problem? That all can be hired away, and it's like, well, easier said than done. Well, can you afford it? Is it an executive assistant or is it an ops or whatever? Like, where can back to the constraints of the 8 functions, right? So then it's like, okay, well, and this is back to the whole decision tree of a set of financials in spite of the or in light of the goal runs. It's like, okay, like you guys said you had cash in the books, but it's like if you didn't, if the company said I don't, it's like, well, you could not take a salary to go replace yourself and to hire that back so you could fix this up now. You could wait a while so you can accumulate some cash while you're juggling some of these things. You can speed it up by tapping your line of credit. You could raise some equity, but that's the whole cap structure to say how fast can we solve this problem based on the level of risk and time. of cash flow that you're looking at. But then it's like the moment that cash gets there, like you might sit in the sales and marketing rev spot until you figure this out, and then you're replacing it with another 17 grand a month C-level executive that just rinses and repeats the machine. I think what happens is, and I've done this and failed miserably, is like, I'm going to pay 15 grand a month for this executive, assuming they're going to come up with that recipe when I
Yeah.
don't even know what the outcome looks like. And I lit 160 grand on fire
Yeah,
and I
that's
have
the
no
same mistake
recipe
I made
still.
with that's the same mistake I made with hiring marketing agencies. I hired them with the expectation that they would help me figure out the metrics and the goals and the plan. And shame on me. I probably should have understood that ahead of time. I was like kind of looking for that guy. It's a tough position maybe for both parties.
It is. And honestly, Renz, and I think about this is why you and I jive so well together is like, I don't know if there's a shortcut to not understanding this shit.
You got to make the mistakes to actually learn what
I,
matters.
right.
Yeah.
Back to like you can light a $5 million on fire and learn all of those mistakes really fast. But what's the risk of like, if you lose that? What's the risk? And I think of back to like, I mean, what's fascinating to me, and then we can be done because I know we're already stealing some of your time here. Is that I look at like when my clients, I mean, they're effectively helping me to do what you're saying. I mean, if it's just coaching program, I got 15 right now. I'm topping out at 20, and we're working on the owner's playbook, and that's it. And then like but the thing is, like, I had a guy, one of my clients go like, "How does that one guy own 6 companies?" I said, "Dude, he knows exactly what questions to ask and how to manage that CEO because he knows exactly how every single thing hits every part of those income statements." And like, it's about resource delegation, and like it's difficult to sit on top without being bullshitted. And that's what I watch what's going on, Rens, with PE versus the operators. The operators, everybody makes all these assumptions for the deal to be done, earnouts, rolled equity, and then the PE firm doesn't know how to sit down in a meeting and go, those assumptions are fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, they don't have the bullshit meter. This conversation kind of ties into the advice I got from Joel Trammell, who you've mentioned a few times, and I'll share it. I talked to him about this same topic, and he said, hire the executive in the area that you're an expert. He's like, it's counterintuitive. Most people think, hey, I got to hire the expert in the area that I don't
Yeah,
have
yeah,
experience
yeah.
in. But it's for this exact reason. It's like it doesn't take much of your time to manage somebody in your area of expertise. You have
Love
a
it.
bullshit meter, you know what they should be doing, you know what results are possible, you can manage them well and know if it's working. And that way you can focus most of your time in the area that you don't know. And I thought that was super insightful
Fantastic
because
idea.
it's counterintuitive.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Dude,
You would
so
know
much
that guy
fun.
built like 2 9-figure businesses. So
Yeah, but like you said, it's so.
sorry. Yeah, 2 9-figure
Yeah,
babies.
yeah, I know. He's like, yeah, I want to sit on the beach
He
and I
knows what
wanted
he's
the
doing.
CEO to call me up and say, on track, off track. And if you're off track, what are you going to do about it? If I got to tell you, what am I paying you for?
Yep.
but but I think about just to put a bow on what you said, it's the desire, like being comfortable getting out of your comfort zone, because the goal of freedom of time and cash flow and impact has to pull us out instead of being fearful. It's we're taking kind of putting a looping all the way back to the beginning part of our conversation. The goal of reaching your fullest potential has to pull you out of your comfort zone, which is where you're focusing most of your time on because it's comfortable, which happens to probably be the highest score in the VOP.
Hmm.
But if you replace that comfort zone by hiring someone, you're going to have the highest leverage over your time because you know exactly what good and doesn't and bad looks like. And then you can keep moving forward, and back to the whole Dan Martell, you're buying your time back by looking at the VOP, what you're good at, and your cash flow. And then at the end of this, I truly believe, friends, like, I mean, the guy that Matt Bernard I was talking about, like, you can sit in the boardroom and move money around. But
Hmm.
it's what's different about this compared to the PE firms generally is like you have the bullshit meter. I mean, without the bullshit meter, I don't know. I mean, it's very anxiety driven from my experience.
I would agree. Yeah. You're your risk, your scarcity mindset at that point. You're fearful of losing because you don't have confidence.
In the future.
Yep.
Dude, this is way overdue. This is so
Ryan,
fun.
awesome conversation, man. Thanks for having
Yeah.
me on.
We'll put the links to your podcast, to your website, and the LinkedIn and all that stuff. Anything else that you want me to put in the show notes or direct the audience to?
Yeah, those things are great. And then obviously, if somebody's out there listening to this and an executive that's excited about growing a business and like this conversation, let's talk.
I love it. Rens, thank you, my friend.
Ryan, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Rens. It's so fun hearing how far he's come since 2018 when I met him. And honestly, watching the success of this mindset, because it's a mindset first and then the hard work happens, but understanding how our hard work and our investments of time and money pay off and then what that ultimate goal is, I think it makes the game fun. I mean, like, it's really hard work what we do, but I think making sure that we know how everything that we're doing provides a return on time, cash flow, wealth is a fun place to be. And Rens is having a lot of fun, which is the whole point. Next week, I've got Patrick Donahue on the show. He is the founder of Hill Capital, and they are an investment fund that helps companies bridge the capital between commercial banks as well as VC firms, and they play a unique part in the marketplace. I've had Patrick on the show in the past. He is very involved in EO, and what I wanted to unpack with him, because I've talked so much about the cash flow being the ultimate metric over the last, however many podcasts, Patrick and I get into it, and it's super fun because he talks about what it means from the investor perspective from him, and then how to actually manage the cash flow. He calls it the cash flow trifecta from his breakout valuation book. And we're going to dive a lot into the jargon, why the jargon doesn't matter, and then how to actually start looking at cash flow and building value and what it means to him from the outside as an investor who's also in the trenches with these owners. So check out next week's episode with Patrick. If you can leave a rating on the show, I would be super grateful. Share it with a friend, and that's how I spread the word. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next week.